You're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us. We were having some Google Hangout technical difficulties, but we're ready to start. My name is Benet Wilson. I am the co-editor of airwaysnews.com, which is an industry-forward aviation-related website. I'm also the air travel expert for about.com, and I blog at aviationqueen.com. I've been in the travel and aviation writing space for the past 20 years. So I'm really excited for this hangout because, on the travel and aviation side, you don't always see a lot of people of color. As a matter of fact, I know I've been in the industry on my end for 20 years plus, and I can count on one hand the number of people that look like me who are covering this topic. Today, we're talking about diversity in travel writing and blogging, which has been a recurring issue. The White House held a summit on this in December, and in April, there's going to be a broader discussion that's going to take place at the Travel Unity Summit in New York City as part of the third annual New York Travel Festival. This summit's going to bring together different voices in travel to discuss the contributions, the needs, and the passions of underrepresented travelers, with a special focus on African Americans and travelers with disabilities. We have several guests today. I'm going to introduce all of them, but first we're going to start off with, I apologize, we're going to start off with Eric Prince Higgins, and he's going to do his introduction, and then we'll continue. Go ahead, Eric.
Hey, thanks for having me. My name is Eric Prince Higgins. I'm chairman and founder of A World Beyond Youth Exploration, a foundation that promotes photojournalism and travel amongst marginalized minorities, primarily African Americans and Latinos in the U.S., and also founder and content creator for MinorityNomad.com. Where I write about my travels as an African American man, and I give tips to gay and lesbian travelers, solo female travelers, as well as travelers of color. I've been blogging for about 3 years off and on, and yeah, I look forward to a great conversation about diversity in blogging.
Thanks, Eric.
And travel writing, of course.
And full disclosure, I kind of ambushed Eric. I feel really bad. He hopped on. There was some discussions about this, and I did try to reach out to male travel writers, and I didn't get the response that I did. So when I saw Eric on, I was like, great, he's here, I'm pouncing. So I appreciate it.
And it's 2 a.m. here, so I'm committed to the cause.
Yes, I really appreciate it. So we're still waiting for our other panelists, so we're just going to go ahead and just have this conversation. Eric, first, can you talk about how did you become a travel writer, in number one? And number two, how did you develop your unique point of view?
Minority Nomad is actually an offshoot of A World Beyond Youth Exploration. When I was going to college at the University of Texas, I was studying government, and I was writing a paper on the effects of government legislation on minority communities. And growing up in East Cleveland, I had a firsthand identification with the situation. And the more that I actually studied how the government operates, the more I realize how marginalized we really are as African Americans. We say it, and a lot of people write papers and do speeches about it, but to really come from East Cleveland, to join the military, go to college, and they actually see the system designed to marginalize us was a little much for me. So I decided to do something. Initially, I was going to go to law school and try to get into politics, but I decided to start my foundation because growing up, photography and travel, the little bit of travel that I did do when I was younger, really had a lasting impact on me as a person. I joined the United States military before I went to college. I served 10 years, and that really opened my eyes to how the world views me as an African American man, particularly in my time in the Middle East. Really showed me who I am as a black man as well as a Muslim at the time. When I put together A World Beyond Youth Exploration, a lot of the pushback that I received was that African Americans don't travel, black people don't travel, we don't have the money, and we just don't, it's not part of our culture. And I thought it was just BS. Consistently being told this by people of color. This is people of color telling me this. I'm a little bit stubborn, so I say, you know what? I'll I'm going to sell everything. I'm going to hit the road myself, and I'm going to do it. Then I started minoritynomad.com purely just to keep in contact with friends, family, and students. A lot of students at my alma mater, Shaw High School in East Cleveland, asked me to keep in touch. And that's how Minority Nomad started. And out of nowhere, just people started sending me emails and commenting on my threads and Facebook PMs and Twitter posts and, hey, we want you to write more, post more pictures, tell us about your trips, and do more videos. And my blog grew because people made it grow. I really didn't do anything special. I didn't take any seminars or courses. Anybody who's read my blog knows I write the way that I speak. And I think that really resonates with a lot of people, especially African Americans who can kind of see through the BS a lot of times.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's pretty much my story in travel writing. It accidentally happened kind of because African Americans wanted it.
Your timing is perfect because I've got Bonnie on here and I've got Carol, our other two panelists. So, Bonnie, I'm going to jump to you, and if you could just introduce yourself, and then I'm going to have Carol introduce herself. And Eric already answered the first question, so then I'll come back to you with that. So go ahead, and thank you so much for doing this.
Introduce myself, you said?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My name is Bani Amor. I'm from Brooklyn. I say by way of Ecuador. I live in Ecuador right now. I'm a travel writer. I have a website everywhere all the time. And yeah, I write about diaspora, I write about race, I write essays, I write travel guides, memoir, just like everything in the travel writing world, I kind of try my hand at. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Carol, you're up.
I'm Carol Cain, and I write. My site is Girl Gone Travel, and I write also a lot about travel and food and a lot of photography. I have 3 kids and a husband, so you know, I kind of include that into it sometimes when I'm not traveling by myself, which I also do often. I do kind of talk a lot about my experiences as a woman of color and as a mom and as a 44-year-old woman traveling and as a Latina traveling, but I do it, I sort of intertwine it with general travel stories so that it's just kind of how I view the world pretty much.
Okay. Bonnie, I wanted to ask you, how did you become a travel writer, and how did you develop your unique point of view in your writings?
My unique point of view is pretty, I don't know, it's just who I am and all of my multiple identities, and I just ran with that. You know, just being of color, being queer, being a woman, these are things that I think Carol was saying we don't really like go out of our way to talk about sometimes, but it's just, this is how I experience my travels, and that's pretty unique in the travel writing scene. I mean, I think it's becoming less unique because of like things like this. There's a lot more folks of color getting involved and talking about all different kinds of diversity in travel writing. And I started by, I've always been traveling, always been writing about it, but I didn't really consider myself a writer until after a trip to South America. I came back from backpacking for about a year to New York, and I was unemployed for like 8 months. It was during the recession, and I was like, I don't know, I just got into reading about it and thinking, well, there's this space that like no one like me is occupying in this sphere. Why don't I inject myself into that and pay for future trips and kind of finance my travels? That's the idea of travel writing, right? Didn't really work out that way, but that's how I started, definitely.
Okay. Carol?
I started, I used to work in public relations, and I left to a very demanding job to kind of be with my kids, and I'm from Brooklyn originally, and so so suddenly I'm home with the kids, and I'm trying to do things in New York, and I'm researching all this stuff of what to do in New York, and it would be things like how to a $100 an hour indoor play area, take your kids there, or a $500 cupcake party. Your kids would love that kind of thing, and I realized that my family immigrated here. I'm a first generation American. And I knew that they weren't paying $100 for me to play, So I kind of wanted to take back. I'm a very rebellious. I have a very rebellious spirit. I wanted kind of to take back the scene of what New York is from my immigrant child's perspective, a working class perspective. A lot of times in travel writing, in travel blogging, there's this emphasis to make everything so glamorous and so cool and so whatever. And the truth is that, my family has traveled for generations, but we are doing it from a very different, from a very different place. Our experiences are very different. And so I approached my introduction to the world of what New York City is for a lot of us, without all that glitz and glamour, and that was well received by a lot of people. People appreciated, the fact that real people actually live every day in a city like New York and aren't spending millions of dollars and living in luxury penthouses, and are raising families there and are going to work there. And I think that's kind of how I do go to luxury places, and I do go to really nice places, but I always try to communicate the reality of what it would take to save up for a trip like that. And I talk a lot about the effort that it would take for my family of 5 to make a vacation like this happen. I think a lot of travel bloggers want so bad. I learned this new terminology called FOMO, #FOMO, and I didn't really know what that was. And what is it, Bonnie? You probably know. It's like,
I don't know what FOMO is. What is it?
Fear of missing out. Fear of missing out, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right. And
I'm late on things.
And so a lot of travel bloggers and travel, especially travel bloggers, they kind of share their content, trying to give their audience that fear, that FOMO, right? And I'm sort of like, I don't want to do that because, we, as people of color, as as immigrants, as whatever, we already have a fear of, what would happen if we go, not so much the fear of what would happen if we don't go. You know what I mean? So I kind of try to share the world from that perspective to make it less intimidating and to make it so that it's more, attainable, which is not, not something that is really done a lot for our, for people of my generation or my cultural background.
Well, you touch on a really good point, and Eric talked about this a little in his introduction. And I wanted to ask you all why you think there aren't a lot of good quality travel writers, people of color in the travel writing space, because it's one of those spaces that has just grown exponentially, and I've seen the growth. But I'm still sometimes hard-pressed to see people that look like us doing this.
I was thinking about this, and I can speak from coming from the public relations world, for example. I'll use that as an example. When I used to do PR, or even when I went to high school, when I went to college, I wanted to study journalism. And I ended up doing communications because the journalism classes, the journalism courses, required that I do internships. And the internships weren't paid. And I could not afford it. My family, my family is factory workers. They're factory workers. They weren't even paying for my college, and so I ended up not going to journalism school because I couldn't afford to work for free. Do you know what I mean? And I talked to a lot of people, non-minorities about it, and they're like, oh, I made it work. I used to just sleep on people's couches, and I just, a friend of mine helped me out and let me stay with them. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? My Dominican grandmother would not be cool with me staying at some dude's living room while I went to for an like, you know what I mean? Like, culturally, we're not connecting here. And I think when it comes to travel writing and the media space, that's a lot of where people come from. They come from these opportunities that are, you know, available to everyone, but really only a select few can take advantage of. It becomes a socio-economic situation, you know? I mean, travel blogging is a it can be a very expensive venture for a lot of people, you know? Like, for me, and so if I want to travel with them, I really have to invest and I really have to save. And I don't think that I think that there are a lot of talented people of color out there, but, you know, getting that first foot in, you know, being able to make that investment is not a financial investment. It's not something that's very easy for a lot of us to do. You know, you have the same conversation with people traveling, kids studying abroad. When I was at the White House, the big question is, why aren't more people of color studying abroad? Well, you know, look where a lot of us are coming from, you know. It's a financial, socioeconomic barrier for a lot of us.
Bonnie?
I totally agree with Carol. I think that the problem with access to travel writing, like, how can you even access this thing? How do you get into it? It's hard enough for people, anyone, to get into it, to break in, and to be successful, and not be broke all the time, and to do it in their own way. I mean, there's lots of ways to do travel writing. I hope people know that there's like service writing, there's commercial writing, there's guide writing, and you could write more creative nonfiction stuff. It's just anything in the sphere of travel. But no, we don't have. I think that the ways that travel is considered travel writing, a lot of vacations and stuff. Yeah, that's where we don't have access to those things. Like, people of color are not going, or poor people, or people from the third world are not going to be able to. We don't have access to those, like, vacations, and we don't have access to, like, the language to be able to, I don't know, describe them in a way that's, like, saleable to someone. But yeah, like, getting a job, getting an internship, working in, where are those jobs? Like, how can you apply to be a travel columnist? Or, you know, it's really hard to break into. And even travel writing workshops, this is how I kind of started. They're so expensive, and everyone else was white, and the teachers are white, and are men, and straight, and it's just like, it's not encouraging. It's like the first travel writing workshop I went to, it was just so discouraging that I just paid for it, and I never went after my first class. It was just, it's so exclusive. It's not inclusive. So there's so many answers to this. There's the whole socioeconomic barriers. There's the fact that there totally are talented, quality travel writers of color out there, and there always has been. Like, for centuries, this is not new. But they're not. It's either not considered travel writing because these are about migrations or about places. Carol said her family has been traveling for generations, so has mine. But those, we don't really get to see that in literature. We don't really get these same opportunities that our white counterparts get. So it's hard to even get to that point of, like, when being a kid and, like, aspiring to travel the world, like, whose book do I read that reflects my experiences? Who can inspire me to be like, I can do that same thing? It was pretty much no one. I mean, there are writers, but it wasn't handed to me. It wasn't, like, accessible, or it's just not talked about. It's not included or considered travel writing. So I think that, I don't know, it's about, like, having more support. I think that the travel writers of color that are out there right now who are trying to make it are, like, struggling. And you don't, in this business, it's a lot about who you know. Mm-hmm. And white people who are in power tend to hire who they know. And it's hard to get into those bubbles if you're not kind of on the same, if you're not writing the same stuff, or if you don't know those people, and they don't know about us. So I think the people in power really need to reach out to other voices and give them positions, give them a little bit, give them a piece, you know, give them a assignment just to help out a little bit. because otherwise it's not like we're not here. It's just that we're not being heard.
Okay, Eric.
Well, I mean, it's hard to add anything to what they've already said. I mean, they pretty much covered the gamut. I can speak from the view of a black man. And the only reason I point this out, because there are quite a few outstanding female writers of color going right now. And there aren't many of us brothers. It's just not many of us. And I think it's because socially, as black men, being a traveler, being a writer, it's really not part of our social makeup. Growing up in the inner city, a lot of times, lyrically speaking, if you want to look at the things that Eric B. and Rakim have done, or KRS-One, or Public Enemy, and the hip hop genre, when they speak on social injustice and travel, that's one thing. But as far as just stepping back and going to Portugal or going to Thailand or going to Ecuador and writing about it, that's just not something that I've ever seen or heard of being promoted within the community. A lot of times I look internally first to what we're doing to encourage travel and writing amongst young African American men, and I just personally don't see enough effort being put in promoting journalism, as was pointed out, at more study abroad programs where it's normal for an 18, 19-year-old African American student to go abroad. Once we become more of a force in the international travel community, I think that you're going to see a lot more of the highly talented young men and women who are writing today, just in different genres, come to the forefront of travel writing.
Okay. I'm going to jump here. Carol, we know that you attended the White House Summit on travel. Can you talk just a little bit, just for a few minutes, about what that was about and what you got out of it and how you think it might help?
Well, the first thing that a lot of people are saying or said immediately were that there were no people of color. There weren't a lot of people of color, but we were there. And I voiced it out a couple of times in different platforms, because we need to be really, really careful when we get, when we let our passions get the best of us, to how we say things. Oh, there were no people of color. When you say that, it minimizes the impact of the people that were there. You know what I mean? Maybe there weren't as many people as I would have personally liked to have seen. Maybe there were people who we consider incredibly valuable voices in the space who weren't present. But they were there, and we did try very hard to make our voices heard. But the overall gist of it was that there's this lack. How the minority, the community of color in the United States is growing, and we're taking over, right? So there's this. There's an interest, a national security interest, and just a financial interest for the country, for the future generation, those coming into the business world, into the workforce, to have a global knowledge. To me, it's like duh, right? Because coming from the Dominican Republic, I studied in the Dominican Republic. It's a tourist-heavy destination, so we are, the ingrained that importance of global knowledge and global, the knowledge of languages and so forth is something that's taught very early on. Americans are just starting to realize, like, wow, we need to kind of encourage our people to have this global savviness, and the only way we're going to probably do that is to get them more engaged in international travel, international programs. How can we get minorities, who are an increasing population in this country, to become more involved? So there were all these conversations of, how can we do that, and what can we do, and so forth. But I want to talk, touching on like something that Eric was saying and a question that I asked. How the way that we promote, and the way that this country promotes the image of a black man in the media. how is that going to make a German family or a French family or a Chinese family feel comfortable enough to host a black child from Bensonhurst in their home? You know, that's huge. That's a huge, you know, barrier that nobody really seems to understand. On top of the fact that, you know, a lot of people were saying, oh, it's really easy. It's really, you know, there are all these programs. There are all these programs. You know, well, how does, you know, my grandmother, who didn't speak a word of English and didn't know how to use a computer, how is she going to find that scholarship that everybody tells me is so available everywhere? You know what I mean? And so there's this lack of understanding, I think, in, you know, there was a lot of promotion of all the different programs and scholarships and opportunities, and there's a lot of excitement to get people involved. And so I felt like that was really good in that sense, because I was able to come back and tell my community, okay, there are all these things there, but my community's already online. How do you tell somebody who's not? You know, how do you tell somebody who doesn't speak English? And I think that's the piece of the conversation that was missing, and probably not communicated as strongly, because there weren't enough of us there to communicate that. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
So, you know, so it was really great, and I was really proud to be there, and it's a really great first step. But I think that, you know, we need to ask the people who aren't taking advantage of these opportunities why they're not taking advantage of these opportunities, as opposed to the people who are living the dream or living it, you know, to turn around and tell them, you know, what they're doing wrong or what they're not doing enough of. So.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect segue to the next question, because, you know, what are you guys' thoughts on what needs to be done to get more people of color into the travel writing space? And to that end, Bonnie, you kind of touched on this a little, you know, is the space oversaturated? And if the people who are in there, if they can't make a living, I mean, how do we balance all this so that we see more people like us in this space?
Again, part of it is just out of our control. I think the people who are in power and have kind of the ability to hire and to assign and to delegate whatever work, or to give people opportunities to travel, whether it has to do with travel writing or not, just to travel, as Carol was saying. That they're not doing that. I mean, there are there's some stuff that's happening. Some people are trying to diversify, but I think that word is becoming so annoying now. Like, there's a sense of tokenism that's happening, where, you know, they get really excited about, like, getting people of color involved in things that it's not really about the quality of work that you're doing or your voice or what particular thing you're doing. That talks to the oversaturation in the field. I think there's a lot of people saying the same thing or talking about the same things. I think that when people of color start blogging about traveling, they tend to just start talking what I talked about in an interview I did yesterday with this travel writer, Brian Kamanzi, about the dominant voice. I think that there's a sense of adopting this kind of established voice that is very servicey and very commercial and very, like, you know, I have nothing against, like, you know, 10 things to do in Quito, because I write that stuff because I have to pay the bills. But if everyone does that, it's like we can't hear your voice, we can't hear what your unique experience is about, and that's what we have, I think, not over the white people in the genre, but I think that since our experiences are just really different, we're coming from different places, the way that we travel and the way that people read us when we go abroad is nuanced. It's, you know, when I go to China, they think I'm Tibetan, so my experience is not going to be the same as these other people. And I think people shouldn't be afraid to talk about that, afraid to talk about just kind of how it's not all glamorous and awesome and easy and the kindness of strangers. I think that we should, I don't know, have a little bit less fear. I think that comes from representation. It comes from seeing other travel bloggers, other travel writers, reading travel writers of color who have books that are published that we should read and buy and tell everyone about. and kind of educate people, educate ourselves, so that we know we're not like the only ones, and we're definitely not. This is actually really broad. There's a lot of travel writers of color doing stuff, and there always have been, as I keep saying. But I think that once we start reading that stuff, once we start reaching out across, these lines and organize within ourselves, because as I started off saying, we don't really have a lot of power. But for me, it's always been kind of like a grassroots effort to, I have an interview series with writers of color, with travel writers of color, and for me it's a way just to just so that I don't feel like I'm so alone, just so I can talk to these other people about travel and colonialism and imperialism and racism in the industry and homophobia when you're traveling. Things that are not really being talked about. It's important to, with the internet now, anyone can kind of create a space. You can create a platform. That's the great thing about being disenfranchised, being of color, even being in the third world. You can start a blog, and it's all out there. There's really no excuse to not really be tuned into what's going on the ground. Yeah, as far as what people can do more in the industry, I think that it's important. I don't know. Travel writing workshops, the whole exclusivity thing, it would be nice if it were more affordable. It would be nice if institutions, if writers, travel teachers can link up with institutions that are more diverse. Like if there was a travel writing class at, CUNY, for example, or CCNY, or Hunter, that would be better, because there are travel writing classes, but they're at Yale and they're at NYU or at Columbia. So that's a really different demographic you're going to get. I think it's really important that travel editors of color are in power. I really don't have any travel editors of color. I know some, but I wish there were more. And at that level, where we're not just kind of the writers, but we're also people in power, I think that's when change is really going to happen, and it won't just be a buzzword or tokenization kind of thing. Yeah, but in order to get to that point, I think there's so many barriers. And again, it's out of my hands. It's out of, it's out of hands of most people of color to be able to kind of change what's happening, and who gets to say what.
Eric, what do you think?
Well, I have to. This is tough because I have a different view of travel writing, travel blogging, and I differentiate between the two. I don't know. I don't have the first-hand knowledge about travel writing from the publishing side, so I won't even touch that. But I do know travel blogging, and I've been doing it for 3 years off and on, and this is the world that I come from, and maybe it's because I spent so much time in the military, but I see the travel blogging community kind of as an organism, as a unit that moves a certain way. And Bani, she perfectly laid out what the field is. That there are minds everywhere. There are those who don't want to lose their position at the top of the top 100 travel blogs to follow in 2015 list. There are those who don't want to get off from that perch. And from a pure capitalistic standpoint, I get it. So as a marginalized person, as a person of color, going into a field where I know the deck is stacked against me, there are certain things that I need to do to make myself stand out. And that's what I focus on. I try to become a better writer. I try to become a better photographer. I try to network with not only writers of color, but all travel writers, and to really get my voice out there and to promote my goal. Granted, my goal is not to end up on a top 100 travel blogs list. My goal is to inspire people of color to travel. That's my end game. If I have to write top 10 things to do in Paris, I'll write top 10 things to do in Paris if that's what my readers want to see. And I believe that if we go into a situation knowing what the issues are, if I walk down a certain street in East Cleveland, Ohio, I know oh, it just might be an issue, so I might not walk down that street. But when you already know what the barriers are, it makes it so much easier for you to get around those or to jump over them. Granted, some can't be overcome, as she perfectly laid out, but at least we can acknowledge that there are other things that can be done on our part to be successful. And the first thing that we should ask ourselves is, what is our goal? What do we want to do? Do I want to become a published author? Do I want to make $1 million blogging? What do I want to do as a travel blogger? Then we can have the conversation about what are the barriers that are in front of you. And those barriers aren't merely based on race. I think, and I want to touch on something that we talked about a little bit earlier, as far as access goes. That's our biggest barrier. And you can see I'm literally 24 hours removed from getting a Facebook message about this talk that I had no idea about, and how many other black men of color are doing what I do. It's not a lot of us. There needs to be more African American men who travel, and No Madness is full of them, who actually put their stories out there and tell, and just like she said, who tell, like, look, there are bad things happening out there. There's racism in Russia. There's a lot of racism in Russia. I was there. There's racism in Buenos Aires, but there's also love in Santiago, Chile. There's also love in Paris. There's also love in Cleveland, Ohio. You have to tell both sides of the story sometimes, and I feel that when we have conversations like this, the narrative starts to shift to the "we're so oppressed" direction, in my opinion. And I believe that that's a bit of a disservice, because I believe as a community we have the talent, we have the skill, and we have the ability to, if they ain't going to let us in their game, we can create our own game at this point. And so and coming back around, that's kind of how I look at travel blogging. It's really a lot of opportunities there. I'm sitting in a room in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, sponsored trip, because of the color of my skin, maybe because of the content that I've produced. But regardless of why I'm here, and I'm sharing my story with Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans who might not have had the opportunity to see this place through the eyes of an African American man before. And I'm blessed, and I appreciate that opportunity, despite however it came about.
You know, you touched on a point there, and one of the things that kind of drove this discussion in the first place was a piece in the Daily Beast about people of color traveling. And I remember reading it and, you know, seeing that they were actually surprised that people of color travel.
Yeah.
And to me, it was just like, what are you talking about? Now, my experience is a little different. I'm a military brat. My dad was in the Air Force, so I grew up all over the world, and, you know, I'm an aviation journalist, so I'm always traveling. But even that aside, I mean, I know people who do travel. I mean, Greg Gross has I'm Black and I Travel, had that website, because he was like, I'm tired of people thinking that, you know, people of color don't travel. So I wanted to talk to you, get you guys' thoughts about that, and, you know, how that kind of plays into the overall narrative about people of color being travel writers, to kind of point these things out so people aren't so, oh, this is such a surprise.
You know, I get that surprise thing a lot. Not only because I'm a person of color, but because I'm a woman and I'm married, right? And I have kids. So I get a lot of, like, who's with the kids? How does your husband feel about that? You know, how do you whatever? And, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, you just gotta do it. But I mean, I think there's so many things that, you know, and Eric was talking about this too. You know, one of the things that I learned really quickly when I started having this conversation about diversity in travel at conferences, I did a talk in T-Bags, of all places, you know, about this. And I had this really wonderful woman say to me, well, what do I do? You know, what happens if I start talking from, because I was saying a lot what Bonnie was saying, you know, we need to talk from a place of personal knowledge, of personal experience, and not follow the narrative, the general narrative, the story that will sell. And, you know, there was a lot of fear expressed to me after that session that if they write from that place, that it won't sell. And I think that for me, I can say from personal experience, and again, maybe it was easier for me because I never meant to make any money out of this or even a career. I was just really pissed off that people were talking about New York City like no poor people live there. And so I wrote that travel piece. I wrote that experience, and I get work. I get work. I have an editor that I work with in Expedia who will turn away pieces that are not representative of who I am as a person. And it's not that he's saying, speak to me as a person of color, be more Latino. It's not that. He's like, I know you have attitude. I know you have sass. I want to see that. So it can sell. You build enough of an audience that's hungry for that voice, that's hungry for those stories, and you know what? They can't turn you away. You can't go with it like, I want to be the editor of Travel and Leisure. You have to go into it like Bonnie was like, that voice isn't being represented in this community. I'm going to be courageous enough and be that voice. And there's an audience out there for it. If you build the audience, it doesn't matter what the hell anybody else says. Like, if you build the audience, they can't fight with those numbers. At the end of the day, it's all a numbers game. And if you bring the numbers to the table because you're delivering something, you're bringing something so unique, even if they never thought of it before, they're going to want you because you're going to sell. You know what I mean? And so I know I went a little bit off on that, but so many of these, like what Eric was saying and what Bonnie was saying, there's a lot of value in being different and speaking from a place that isn't normally spoken from, and from being courageous. And maybe you won't get on the magazines right away, but that doesn't mean that you won't. Totally missed your question, but I just needed to get it.
It's okay. It's a good point.
What was the question again? I can't remember the question.
I'm sorry. No, because I was like, it made some really good points. The question was about the Daily Beast article piece.
Oh, yeah.
I was just so shocked that people of color
are
out traveling in the world,
From you know what? I might don't get mad at me for saying this, but I honestly don't think we travel as much as we think we do as a community. I'm a numbers guy. I've always been a numbers guy. And statistically speaking, just think about how many just Americans, have passports. Now think about what percentage of those, that small percentage, what is it, 31, 32%, maybe 40%? Think about what percentage of that group are likely African American or Latino. If we just look at it from a socioeconomic standpoint, a lot of people in our community don't feel that it's viable. I think Nia brought up a good point that travel within our community is largely revolved around military service, and there are a lot of people who don't want to serve in the military. Granted, I served and loved my career, but it shouldn't be that a brother has to go get shot at for a living to be able to go see the world. That's not the case, and I believe that there's this idea that travel is infinitely expensive when it's not. We all know the numbers of disposable income that African Americans have now. We're an economic force and a powerhouse now, and we can afford travel. And I think that we have to shift. As a community, we have to shift and travel more on our own. Not trying to get, more stamps in our passport. Not trying to impress our friends or family, but to enrich ourselves. To discover what Ecuador is like. I want to go to Ecuador and taste the chocolate because they say it's the best in the world. Not because I want to impress my parents, because I like chocolate. I think. When we start to promote travel as a personal growth tool, as something that can not only enrich you personally but financially, I think a lot more African Americans would travel. A lot of you guys know I'm on the road 11 months out of the year. I'm outside of the U.S. During that time, I don't meet many African Americans. And when I do meet African Americans, they're women. I'd say easily 4 out of 5 are African American women of the African Americans I meet in 11 months. And it's really frustrating because we have Norwegian Airlines flies $600 round trip tickets from the East Coast and the West Coast to London now. Why are we not traveling more? And it really is frustrating. And so my answer, long-winded answer to that question is, I don't think we travel as much as a lot of people claim we do.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point, because this Christmas, my husband and I took our 9-year-old kid to Paris and London for Christmas. And everyone on all my Facebook friends, oh, you guys are rich, baller, baller. I'm like, no, we are not rich. We scoured for deals. We started saving for this trip at the beginning of last year, and we did a lot of budget stuff. We were not eating in the big gourmet restaurants. We did public transportation. So, there are ways to do it that it's affordable, but getting that message out, Yeah.
Well, and also you have a lot of the immigrant community. I know the Dominican community here in New York. They travel. They travel to Dominican Republic because that's the only time, and they go to see family, And so there's this allotted budget to take a certain number of trips every year, and that trip is going to be to see the family. And so I have luxury living because I can go take one trip and not see my family, and another trip to see my family. Do you know what I mean? If I go see my family, I'm not doing anything else. But I also think that there's this idea that to travel or to be a travel blogger, you actually have to get on a plane. And I built my entire career without ever leaving New York City. So there has to, so like if somebody, being able, if you are, if you're Bani and you're Ecuadorian, take that, empower yourself to tell that story of your country, of your people, as opposed to having somebody else who's looking at it as this foreign land and then being published and telling that story for you. It doesn't matter where you are. You can find the travel piece there without having to get on a plane. I mean, there's value in that as well. It doesn't have to be, and I think people shut down because they think, oh, it's not really travel. It's not really of value if I'm not going to, whatever, China. There's also value in the local story, and I think people can start there and build a career from there, so that the opportunities where you're invited to go to Malaysia, for example, come about. We all have to start from a different place, and because of the socioeconomic aspect that we've all touched on, that's a really good place to start.
Bonnie, what do you think
about that article? I'm a person of color. Like, the article is specifically about the Black travel movement and nomadness and travel noir and stuff. But so I'm not surprised. There was no element of surprise that POC travel. Like, I don't understand that response. I didn't hear that response. I don't know why there's surprise. Like, again, what Carol is saying in the question, it goes back to what we consider travel writing to be. And I think has to do with place, and writing about the place, nature-based writing, place-based writing, migration-based writing. I think a lot of those narratives are kind of put into niche categories, like, oh, this is about race, or this is about returning to the motherland, or this is about ethnicity. It's not really considered travel writing. Or traveling. It's not considered going on vacation. If I come back to Ecuador, people just like, oh, well, you're Ecuadorian. You're not. I'm not considered an expat. So yeah, I don't understand the level of surprise that we do travel, and that there's lots of ways that we, there's forced migration. There's all kinds of narratives that are travel narratives. Yeah, it's funny that people don't think that it's not considered traveling.
But I think it's because so many of us are focused. We're letting ourselves be influenced by what travel media puts out there, And we have so many interesting stories to tell, but because we don't see the content out there, we feel that's not going to fit this publication or that publication, and so we just we don't tell the story, and the stories are really, really good. I mean, I recently went to a resort, and I was the only person of color there, and I signed up to take an African drum class, and I walked into the class, and 3 people came up to me and were like asking me when we were going to start the class, what were the drums, what's going on, and I put that on my Facebook page. Hey, that moment when you walk into an African drum class and everybody thinks you're the instructor, and I can't even tell you how many, like one person actually said, "Were you nice in your response to them?" And so I'm not gonna lie, like for a moment I was like, why did I put this on my Facebook? Because now I have to deal with basically defending myself as I'm not this angry black person, not the angry black woman. I didn't get stabby. I of course I spoke to them nicely. Like what, and you get really defensive, and so the next time it happens, you're like, I'm not gonna tell that story. I mean, not me, because I'm like, I'm gonna tell that story now. But most people would not tell that story, and so the stories just don't get told. But they are out there. We don't want to deal with the confrontation. I literally had to a whole conversation about how I wasn't angry about it and why I wasn't angry about it, but yet why it was a big deal that I was, confused as the African drum, and so it becomes this convoluted thing that most people don't want to deal with, and so they don't tell the story, and so therefore we don't travel because we're not talking about it. I don't.
No, do
you want to go?
No, go ahead. You got it. Go ahead.
I think all of this, like the way that we frame this, is putting all the onus on people of color for not telling the stories, not traveling enough. We're not doing this work, or we're not getting the numbers. I don't feel that way, not because we're not telling the stories, but because where are the spaces who will publish these things in our voices? Even what if we did respond angrily? Who is going to publish that? Where are the platforms for that?
You have to create it. That's the thing. You just have to create the platform. I am published, but I never thought I would be because of my voice. And I think we kind of have to start off from a place where we're okay with that. You know what I mean? We can't be like, we're not going to do it because this publication isn't going to pick us up. We have to start from a place where our own personally created space is good enough, and then grow from there. It's not that we have to settle, and it's not that we have to satisfy ourselves with less. It's just that we can't allow ourselves to be discouraged if we don't immediately see the results that we see happening elsewhere.
I think the question becomes, what's the goal? Like what is the motive?
Yeah.
What is the motive to tell the story? Because I say whatever I want on my blog. The story's out there. Is it to be published? Then that's a perfectly valid conversation. So I think it comes back really to what your goal is as a travel writer. Just like anything else in life. In sports, do you want to go to the NFL, or do you just want to win a national championship? It depends. Your actions are dictated by your goal.
And we're kind of running out of time, but I do have another question. We wanted to talk about resources, everything from the blogs you like to read, travel groups you're involved with, sponsorships, fellowships, grants, that sort of thing, to help people get into this space and offer their unique perspective. So do you guys have any advice for how people can do that?
Go
ahead.
The only resource that I'll talk about and that I really know about that speaks to this is that I don't know if you guys know about Vona Voices. It's an annual writing workshop just for people of color in the United States. And last year they started having a travel writing workshop, and they have it again this year. There's financial aid available if you write a letter. And the way that I got there last year is doing a crowdfunding campaign. So yeah, that's, if anyone's watching this and is interested in becoming a travel writer and who is of color, that's a great resource. It's awesome.
I would recommend also, Bona, I was going to say that also, but for overall learning how to travel blog success, written done by David Lee out of Medellin, Colombia, which is a phenomenal resource for anybody who's trying to build a great travel blog. I would really have to credit them with helping me in the early year, really getting my blog to where it is today. And there's so many phenomenal Facebook groups out there, and I would caution people of color from just going to a people of color forum, and really branch out to business of travel blogging and travel blog success. And I have a group called Black Travel Chronicles, where all we post is stories, travel narratives. That's the only thing that we allow to be posted. So there not only can you reach out to people of color, but also reach out to people who've been successful in travel blogging just in general, despite their backgrounds.
I mean, I've done a lot of connecting with a lot of different minority people who have been successful in their field, photography, writing, and I kind of just follow them and listen to them and take their advice. I get turned off by anybody that's too, a little bit too, maybe, I don't want to use the word angry, but you know what I mean? Because we're like, ah! But, I try to find people who are, like, really professional and really level-headed, and, and a lot of the organizations already mentioned have been really good ways of connecting with people like that. And I just sit back and listen. Whatever my anger issue may be or my frustration issues, I put them to the side and really listen to these people, because they have such knowledge and such experience that they can share with so many of us.
And then I'm going to end it with this last question. You guys can give one piece of advice to everyone on what it takes and what they should do to kind of move towards becoming a travel writer. So, what is that one piece of advice?
Mine would be, sorry. I'll go.
Go ahead.
I'll be quick. Mine is no matter how hard it takes, or what you need to do to get to that point, find your own voice. Do not conform to anything else that's out there. Don't try to be saleable. I mean, if you want a career in this, it's kind of a hard road, and I don't know if you might need to make some sacrifices or whatever. But what's most important is being a writer and writing things that you're proud of and that reflects what you really mean to say. And sometimes that takes a lot of work. Sometimes no one's going to publish that. Sometimes you need to get a day job. Whatever. Just don't give up on trying to sound like yourself.
I would lean towards confidence. Be confident in whatever you're doing, and confidence comes from preparation. If you want to be a great travel writer, learn how to write. Actually, take classes, read books, and reach out to writers who are successful. If you want to be a great photographer, take workshops, go on YouTube and get a camera and get out and shoot. Preparation solves a lot of problems before they happen. So I would say be confident in yourself, your skills, and your voice. And that only comes by preparing yourself to be successful.
And in addition to everything else that what you guys have said, I include that, and also just there's no money to be made in doing what everybody else is doing, so there's really no risk in doing something completely different. So if that means telling a story that you're afraid will never get published, but it's so true to you and it's so interesting that that it's somebody will want to read it, then do it. I mean, it's harder to break into it when you follow the norm than when you create a new path. So if you're doing it for the money, it's a job, and just like when you work in corporate, whether you like wearing suits and ties, you're going to have to wear a suit and tie. But if we're talking about, writing from a place of passion and writing from a place that's authentic to us, then, like Eric was saying, that takes a lot of confidence, and you just kind of have to do it. Just create the voice. If you don't see it out there, then do what Bani did, and just create it. Just build that platform.
I want to thank you all so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. I think everybody learned a lot, and especially Eric, who just thought he was dialing in and ended up being a part of the conversation. But I think
I was planning to sneak out and go to bed. It's 3 a.m. here.
So thank you all again for doing this. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, and pleasure meeting you all.
Nice to meeting you.